The core question is this: can science explain everything in the universe? And by virtue of that, is physicalism true?
Right off the bat, he jumped in with the exact category error that makes people think that physicalism is science, or that science is telling us what reality is.
I like to call this the physicalism's problem of isness, right? So science can only ever tell us what stuff does. It doesn't ever tell us what stuff is. It tells us relations. It doesn't tell us what is relating.
This notion that science is the only way we talk about any subject with any kind of clarity is so ingrained in the culture that I am very apt to point out to people who are trying to move this conversation into the realm of science that this is not a move you can make, because so many people want to say, well, we don't know, is reality mental or physical? Let's go to science, because science is the only way we get answers.
Hey, what's up, man? Okay, so everybody, we're gonna do a reaction video of sorts to a interview that Alex O'Connor had with Sean Carroll. This gets into metaphysics. This gets into philosophy of mind. This gets into the philosophy of emergence, which is like really important these days when talking about the question of consciousness. Mary's Room, the thought experiment Mary's Room, and the knowledge argument that goes along with it against physicalism. All this stuff is really interesting. They got into a bunch of interesting things. The core question is this: can science explain everything in the universe? And by virtue of that, is physicalism true? Right?
Yeah,
Because
actually, when you said started all the list there, I was like, wait a minute, you forgot the most important thing, which is the last thing you said there, which is that they basically get into the limitations of science and then the metaphysical entailments of what Sean Carroll's view is about that. And that to me is the crux of the conversation.
okay, cool. Yeah, so we're gonna do like a commentary on this interview. I've got a whole list of timestamps here. I will share my screen.
Yeah, I want to say also, this is also like a concrete drill to the head to me to watch this video in its entirety.
Yeah. Look, it's all love, but Sean Carroll, you look like an android. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm sorry. I still love you, but
Sean Carroll, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Is science on its own enough to understand the universe?
The universe, maybe. Yeah, I do think that there are plenty of questions out there that science is not up to the task of uniquely answering. Maybe those questions include things like mathematics, which is sort of purely formal and logical and would be true either independently of whatever the scientific facts about the universe were. I would also say that things like morality and aesthetics are not out there in the universe, except for the fact that they're invented by we human beings who are part of the universe. But I do think that science is up to the task of explaining what the universe is and what happens in it. And that's basically science's job.
Let's stop there for a sec. So right away, okay, the first thing he says is science's job is to tell us what reality is, what it is, right? This is the mistake immediately.
Immediate category error. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. And so I saw that and I'm like, okay, so that's the fundamental thing. Because he believes that's a metaphysical claim, right? That's basically saying physicalism is true as soon as you say that. Because if physicalism is true, then it does make sense that science, which is a method that relies. So I think we should put this right at the beginning, that what we mean when we say science, because I think he would agree with this, as you'll see in a minute when we go through this. He talks about things that are out there in the world, right? And what we mean when we're talking about science in this context, and I think is when most people are talking about science, is a method with which you make a hypothesis and you use sensory perception in order to gather data to falsify your hypothesis. Which means in the method, the method limits itself to that which shows up to sense perception. And what he's saying is here that if that's science and science tells you what reality is, then that means that we know that our sense perception shows us
Mhm.
reality as it is.
Mhm. Yeah, he's making a quiet assumption that what you just said, our sense perceptions are revealing reality, that we as evolved monkeys are able to decode the ultimate nature of reality with our particle detectors and our mathematical theories. Um, it is a category error, because just to assume that science tells us what reality is to make a metaphysical claim, which you would need to justify. You can't just make that statement as if it's just trivially true, in my opinion. So
Right. And you know, Bernardo would say here, no, science tells you how reality behaves on the screen
right,
of perception. And
right,
that is a big distinction to make, to sort of realize the epistemic limit there of what your method is capable of. And it's this very confusion, this particular confusion right here, that makes someone so confident um, in a lot of things they say later about what reality actually is. So
yes,
I think right off the bat, he jumped in with the exact category error that makes people think that physicalism is science, or that science is telling us what reality is. I mean, he just said it
yeah.
straight out.
And
That's
it's
what it's
very
doing.
unfortunate because, as you said, it's just based on an assumption, and it's not something that science says that this is the metaphysically true picture of the world. It just
Right.
happens to be very useful.
And
Okay,
as he goes on here, you'll see he immediately contradicts this. So let's go ahead.
okay.
You're one of those people it's difficult to know where to even begin, given everything that you cover in your work. But I think that perhaps one sort of overview picture here is on this question of what science does. You just said that science explains. I often speak to physicists who say that really the job of physics and science is to kind of make predictions about the future. And really all it does is like observe things that happen and sort of describe the things that happen and use that to make predictions. Other people think it's got explanatory power. Some think it's purely functional. What do you think is the actual role of science? What can it do for us?
It's interesting that scientists are so bad at this themselves, but that's why
Agreed.
we have
Agreed.
people like philosophers of science, historians of science, sociologists of science, etc. I mean, if you were talking to an archaeologist and you tried to make the claim that the purpose of science was to predict the future, they would be like, what are you even talking about? You know, I think that different kinds of science have different capacities. I just like to say that science describes the universe, the
Stop.
past,
Stop.
present, and
Okay, so science describes the universe. So what does it do? Does it describe the universe, or does it tell us what the universe is?
Right. Does it describe the behavior of the universe as it appears to us in our sense perceptions, or is it telling you literally what it is?
Right.
That is
So
the
which
question. And
one
so
is
he's
it?
kind of flip flopped.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like
Mhm.
that's not the same thing. So now we're
Right.
changing what it is. Which, by the way, I completely and wholeheartedly agree that science is giving us a description, right, of
Mhm.
what appears to our sense perception. Now,
A
there's another
very
layer.
useful description.
Because yeah, and of course, we should put that at the outset of this video, actually, that we are not anti-science in any way, shape, or form. Science is incredibly useful in the realm and in its sphere of competence. But where we go way out over our skis is when we say that it is actually good at everything.
Mhm.
And of course, it's not good at everything because its method, as I described, limits itself, rightfully so, to the subset of things that appear to sense perception. Go
Mhm.
ahead.
Yeah. I think there's about a minute left that you wanted to.
and
Yeah.
future of the universe. In physics contexts, physics contexts are very special because physics has this remarkable ability to simplify complicated things down to the essence of just a few moving parts. And that gives us the ability to make predictions with wonderful precision in the future. So we tend to valorize that or almost fetishize it. Like that's what we want to be able to do. But there's a lot more to science than that. Certainly, people who study the cosmic microwave background in cosmology, the leftover radiation from the Big Bang, they're doing science, I'm pretty sure, even though they're not trying to predict the future. So I think of science as doing its best to find a model of the universe, of how reality works. Whether you count that as an explanation or not is more a philosophical question or even a linguistic question. But
Yeah. I mean, are you
There
good
we go.
there? He just said it, right?
Yeah.
The question here is it telling you what reality is, or is it telling you what reality does in a certain context? And the context of that is as it appears to us, right? And he appears to just keep conflating. And this is
it keeps changing too. So it tells us what reality is, was the first one. Then it's a description of reality. Now it's a model, right? And has to do with behavior. And this is just very confused. And he starts out saying, well, I wonder why scientists are so bad at this. Well, I ask back, why? Like, Sean, come on, man. like get your, you're speaking fast and loose with things that mean different things in the same, what are we in now? 2 minutes into what he was saying, right? And this is the primary confusion that starts us off right away of let's just immediately make the big mistake and say that it says what reality is, not what reality appears to us.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, there's too much more. I maybe got through. Yeah, you can jump to your next one.
Okay. Yeah. Next they move on to talk about this thing called the PSR. I think I'll let them say it.
Sufficient reason, which there's this principle in philosophy called the principle of sufficient reason.
This is about
which
3
we're
minutes
kind of
long.
driving at here. You said a second ago that we have no right to demand an explanation for anything. And I think that's true in the sense that we might not be able to apprehend the explanation. There might not be like an explanation that we can uncover. It might be too complicated or outside of our grasp. But a lot of philosophers think that if something is true, there must be an explanation or a reason why that thing occurred, even if we won't actually know what that thing is. And some reasons for thinking that are like, well, trivially, if you think it's possible that things can occur for no reason, with no explanation, then some people ask, like, well, why doesn't that happen all the time? You're not worried, as one of our sort of fellow colleagues, I suppose we could consider him, William Lane Craig, likes to point out, you're not worried that a car or like an entire village has just popped into existence, while you're here doing this. But if you believe that things can happen without an explanation or without a reason, just as a brute fact, why not? Why aren't you worried about such things?
Okay, so yeah, what Alex is talking about is what's called the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason. There's different versions of this. There's a strong PSR, there's a weak PSR, but essentially it's trying to delineate philosophically whether or not there should be reasons to believe things. There's reasons that facts are true. And almost everybody's going to say yes to a certain extent. But as you'll see here coming up, Sean has an interesting response to that.
And so that might give us reason to think that at least in most cases, actually, we kind of do need to demand that there is an explanation.
Yeah, I think that many philosophers do accept the principle of sufficient reason, going back to Leibniz, and I think that they're wrong. I think that is a very wrong-headed thing to ask for, and the examples you gave illustrate perfectly why they're wrong, because a lot of people have in mind that either there is a reason why literally every fact is true. Every fact that exists, I mean, that the formulation of the principle of sufficient reason is for everything that is true, there is a reason why it is true. Or there's no reasons, right? Or like anything can happen, cars and chairs can pop into existence, like chaos is loosed upon the world. I think it's pretty clear that there's an intermediate position where some things happen for some reasons and other things are just brute facts.
Yeah. And look, if I'm being a little cheeky here, what he really means by that is, look, everything that I can explain using physicalism is going to have a reason, but everything that I can't explain using physicalism is going to be a brute fact.
Doesn't need one, right? And that's convenient, isn't it?
It's very convenient.
Yeah. So he's like, I think there's a middle position where I don't need to explain the things my ontology makes impossible.
Right.
So that way, when you bring up later that like, how does consciousness exist in your picture? I say, well, it just does. And that's
exactly where this is going. That's very true.
And,
about a minute
maybe
left.
That's
here.
true. Maybe it's not. I think it is true. But surely you can't argue against it just by saying that without imagining that everything has a definite reason why it's true, then nothing can possibly have reasons at all.
I think the question that would jump out would be like, okay, if there are some things which don't require an explanation, and there are some things that do require an explanation, do we have an explanation why there are some set of things that need an explanation and some set that don't? Or is it this kind of arbitrary distribution? Because it feels weird to say that there's like a reason why this particular thing doesn't need a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why some things require an explanation and other things don't is because some things would falsify our metaphysics of physicalism.
Right.
So-
But let's say too though that like there's obviously is some things that you won't be able to give a reason for, and we call those things what is fundamental to our ontology, right? That we are just stating as I'm starting here, right? And but at the same time, what you can't do then is say, well, you can do that, but what you can't do is say, well, I'm going to say the things that don't require an explanation arbitrarily, you know, like not because I'm calling them fundamental or whatever, but because they just don't need an explanation for that.
Yeah, let's see here. Let me go to 44 minutes. They're going to talk about emergence here, the kind of philosophy of emergent properties, which is really kind of an important
Formative.
thing in the conversation around consciousness.
Understand emergent objects at skipping like that accurate information that mental is not fundamental, and there's something even deeper than that. So the fact that the world appears to us as multiple lested emergent levels of description is incredibly useful for getting through the day and dealing with what happens in the world.
That's true.
Now, I agree with that. And I want to talk about this concept of emergence. And I suppose the question to ask is, do you think that emergence, that is, you know, like stuff that kind of comes out at a higher level when you put smaller, more foundational stuff together and you get kind of new stuff emerging, is that a feature of the universe and the things within it? Or is it a feature of our descriptions, right? Because if I've got, you know, a bunch of people, if I've got like 22 people stood on a field and I just sort of mentally group them into two teams and I start talking about like football teams, and you've got this sort of emergent concept of a football team which emerges from the individual players on the pitch, it doesn't feel like the universe is actually doing anything there. It feels like I'm just kind of applying a description that's useful for me to sort of navigate the world. But then sometimes people talk about emergence as not just a descriptive thing. I mean, a popular example is something like the wetness of water or temperature emerging from vibrating atoms because the temperature, you know, an individual atom isn't hot, you know, that kind of thing. When you talk about emergence, do you think that like real emergence exists? There's a sort of better philosophical terminology here, strong and weak or whatnot, but you get what I'm driving at. Or do you think it is just a descriptive thing that humans are doing?
Yeah, so I think what Alex is trying to point out here is that it seems as though when we find things useful, we tend to reify that and think that it has some ontological or metaphysical existence beyond just our description of it. So, like a good example that he gave was the sports team, or another good example that I think he might talk about here in a couple minutes is like the borders of countries. Like, there's no real border there. It's a conceptual distinction that we make as people trying to make use of like the world. Another example is like temperature. Temperature is just an average of all the molecular motion in like, say, a room. That doesn't mean that temperature is real. It's not like a real emergent property. It's a conceptual one. But Sean wants to make the argument that it is real because it is useful. And I think that this ends up confusing the discussion around consciousness, because right here he'll say that it's real. But when we talk about consciousness being an emergent property, he'll say that it's not real, essentially.
Right. So it's a way to have your cake and eat it too, essentially,
Yeah.
is what you're saying. And yeah, that's another convenient thing to do when you're trying to defend a position, is to be able to have it one way in one instance and another way in another.
Right.
But I talked about football.
Oh, I almost forgot. I had somebody say to me yesterday, another example of this is somebody goes, look, emergent properties are real. Like an example of that is that a car doesn't become a mode of transportation until you put the last piece in. Like if it's missing one of its tires, it's not a mode of transportation. It's the whole thing together collectively, and it has this emergent property of being a mode of transportation. And me, I'm like, that seems absurd. What do you mean? That's a conceptual distinction. That is a teleological description of something that exists in the universe. Unless you think the universe is intrinsically teleological, like moving towards some purpose, then being a mode of a transportation is just something you're like creating, you're imparting onto the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Team a moment ago, and I don't know your ontology of sports teams, but I kind of get the impression that a sports team isn't like a real thing. It's something that we've kind of mapped on to individual players. But I can also talk about a football team in the same kind of way that, you know, a scientist might talk about weather or wind or air pressure or something, in that I could say, you know, well, the team is playing very defensively. Or maybe you're the manager and you say, I need the team to be defensive in order to win the game. You don't actually even need to really understand what that would involve for individual players. All you need to know is what the team is doing. And so, yeah, there's sort of a truth of the matter. We can speak objectively and make predictions about who's going to win the game based on the behavior of the team without knowing the individual players' decisions. And yet I still want to say that this emergent sort of thing, the sports team, isn't real. It's like it's a
Why?
concept.
Why
It's
not
a
just
category.
accept it? Why not just deal with
Would
the
you-
fact that you talk about tables and chairs and sports teams as real all the time?
Yeah. So what's interesting here is he wants. We're going to point out so many contradictions. Look, Sean, it's nothing personal. I mean, I'm sure you won't see this video, but it's just, you know, look, when it comes to like, say, the question of morality, you're going to have a totally different approach. You're going to say, I don't care if I talk about morality as if it's objectively real. It's not. It's totally subjective. But here, you think just because it's a useful concept to describe, you know, a sports team, then you should reify it to real status. It's just, it's so inconsistent.
Yep.
Let's see.
And we're going to have, while you search that up, we're going to have a discussion after this about science and ontology and issues around this kind of conflation that's being made here, but more generally, and then how to sort of talk about that and strategically talk about this subject of consciousness at all.
Yeah, the core question here is, can science explain everything up to and including consciousness? So we're going to kind of wrap back around at the end there, once we get through going through this.
Are referring to when you say the word table exists. But in the same way, my favorite example to describe what I mean here is if I asked, like, do you think the left-hand side of this microphone exists? The answer is yes, the left-hand side of this microphone exists. But clearly it's like designation as a thing, the left hand as opposed to the right hand, is just a mental distinction, right? But if I said, you know, before we looked at the microphone, before we were here, did the left-hand side of the microphone exist? The answer is yes, because the thing I'm referring to now in our conversation did exist. But its distinction as like an ontological object that really exists in the world is still like mind dependent. Does that make sense? Like I sort of see the sports team in the same way. Like, yeah, the sports team exists, but its designation as like a distinguishable object from other sports teams and that does stuff is still dependent on the mind. But
So this gets into like mereology, which is the study of things in parts. Alex O'Connor is a self-described mereological nihilist. I would fall somewhere near mereological nihilism or constructivism, but all the jargon aside, it just means like, to him and to me and maybe to Stash as well, it seems like the boundaries between things, like he gave a great example of there of like the left side of this microphone, like it's clear that the microphone like exists, but to say the left side of the microphone is a mind dependent like abstraction, and you would know what I mean when I say the left side, but that doesn't mean that there's like a metaphysical left side. Like it's just how we carve out the world to make use of it.
Right. I mean, it's basically that things exist in insofar as we label them those things,
That's right.
right? But at the ontological level, at the base level, right? And obviously knowing our ontology, that everything is mental and everything is consciousness, there's no real distinction between the things. That is a relative distinction. And see what Sean wants to do is say that um there is nothing relative here. There's just the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the thing as it is.
Mm-hmm. Which we could talk forever about that, but now they're going to talk about physicalism, what physical means, etc. This part is really interesting too.
And I want to ask what is a deceptively difficult question, because people say to me sometimes, yeah, I'm a materialist. I believe the universe is just made out of material, or it's just made out of physical stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. What is that? What is physical stuff? Well, what's the sort of operative definition that makes physicalism a definable worldview?
Well, there is absolutely a problem in physicalism, namely that we keep changing our best theories of physics, right? Like you would have given a different answer in 1850 about what is the physical stuff that makes up the world as you would have in 1950, because we had revolutions and relativity and quantum mechanics and things like that. That's why I have sympathy for structural realism that admits there is something out there that is real, but we don't know what it is for the final answer. What we know is that there are certain structural relations embedded in there, even as our ontology continues to improve along the way.
Mhm.
Having said all that, I think that our best current answer to the question is that the world is a vector in Hilbert space.
I just figured you would like that part, dude.
Yeah,
You got
that's awesome. Yeah. Hey, at least he admits it, you know what I mean?
yeah.
And look, like I obviously like to me, I always say this, and I know maybe you disagree here or not, but none of this, like they're not ontologically changing the kind of category they're talking about when you have these
Right.
revolutions.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
goes from atoms and little building blocks that are in space and time to, you know, a quantum field, but they're still all quantitative in nature, which is
Mhm.
what keeps them physical. And so I can give him a pass for all of this. He says it's a problem in physicalism. It's not a
Mhm.
problem in physicalism. It's just that you've tied your ontology to science, and science just makes models. So of course it changes all the time.
Yeah, the interesting bit to me is to say that the world literally is a vector in Hilbert space is clearly mistaking the map for the territory. I don't know how to like explain this any more simply other than look, we have these experiences, we make measurements of those experiences, we do observations, we do science, then we take those observations and those measurements and then we make mathematical theories from those that are all based in experience again, and then eventually those mathematical theories end up describing a really abstract thing like a vector in Hilbert space, like a wave function. um that's the map that we've been drawing of our own experience. And to say that that map is what the universe is just so obviously a category error to me. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah, my wife wasn't going to marry me because of the way I looked, but then when I explained to her that I'm a vector in Hilbert space, she accepted, and I'm glad it all worked out.
It kind of makes you sound like a hot shot, dude. I'm a vector in Hilbert space. You know?
Yeah,
Um
yeah. No, but this
excuse
is
me.
honest. Like this is what our ontology is. This is what the reality is made out of. Is a vector in Hilbert space. That's
It's a,
physicalism. That's physicalism.
it's an abstract mathematical
I mean, it's
entity.
not nothing out there that we see. That none of that exists. That all exists in my brain, right?
Mhm.
And what's
Mhm.
out there is vector and Hilbert space, which you can't imagine that as like in space and time or like in some kind of sensual. There's no sensual quality to it at all. That's what actually exists. This is what physicalism says, and people don't recognize that. Like, you know, they're the ones saying that all of the stuff we see, the room around me, is actually in between my
Mhm.
skull plates.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like solipsism.
Mm.
Mhm. And to what degree do you think that not just this view, but any scientific view, and I'm sort of throwing the Philip Goff line at you here, can really inform us about what stuff is rather than just what it does. I mean, we talked about science as being descriptive, as sort of coming up with laws that describe things that we observe. But if you're looking for what this stuff actually is, which when you say you've got a metaphysical position, I'm a physicalist, I believe the universe is made out of a particular kind of stuff. If the stuff that you describe is mostly described in terms of like something that occurs or a mathematical sort of formula or something, you're still left with this ontological gap of what the stuff is. Do you think that science can tell us what stuff is, or can it only ever really tell us what it does, to the extent that we'll never quite be able to like grasp the isness of whatever's down there at the foundation?
I don't think there's anything to be grasped. I don't think there's any answer to the question, what is it, aside from how does it behave and how does it interact with other things?
Yeah, so I like to call this.
That's why he said at the beginning, science tells us what it is.
Yeah.
Because of that belief.
Yeah. I like to call this the physicalism's problem of isness, right? So science can only ever tell us what stuff does. It doesn't ever tell us what stuff is. It tells us relations. It doesn't tell us what is relating. Alex O'Connor has this great, I'm not sure who he got it from, but it's about chess, right? So if you ask a chess grandmaster what a bishop is, he would tell you it's a piece that moves diagonally across the board. It can't jump over other pieces. It plays a certain strategic role in the game of chess. And then you go like, no. Like I don't want to play chess. I want to know like, what is it? The chess grandmaster would just be like, what do you mean? That's what it is. But it's a very limited description, and it's only useful in a very certain context, which is the context of science and prediction and empirical adequacy.
Again, this thesis is that my sense perception showed me reality as it is. Because if you're saying, well, yeah, because he's saying there's no answer to the question, but then he does answer the question. He says what it is the appearances. So it is what I see. So it's not that he doesn't have an answer to the question. It's that he does, and he thinks that reality is what we can observe with sense perception. And then you'd have to say, okay, why do you believe that? Why do you think that you have a view on reality, and some objective view through your sense perception on reality?
Yeah, basically a view from nowhere, right? Like the claims that the physicalist makes is that I have a view from nowhere. I have a view that's not tainted by any point of view, but obviously putting together a large number of subjective points of views and adding in a little mathematical magic does not give you a view from nowhere.
Yeah.
Children's laughter, whatever it is. What is going on there in your view? What is giving rise to this sui generis, to famously the redness of red in the right kind of way, and then gives rise to something that, for physicalists, you think that there is this sort of field of stuff, of physical matter, even if we don't quite know what that is, that somehow bumps together in the right kind of way, and then gives rise to something that isn't just like, a rock crumbling off a cliff or something, but is experience, famously the redness of red, the taste of Coca-Cola, the sound of children's laughter, whatever it is. What is going on there in your view? What is giving rise to this sui generis, to use the same term that you did, thing in the universe called experience?
I don't think it's any different than tables and chairs. I think that experiences and conscious awareness of things is a set of vocabulary words that we use to describe collective behavior of particles and forces in the universe.
Now notice the very sneaky inversion that has happened here. He wants to reify the useful concepts such as temperature, such as the delineation of a country, and say that no, those are real emergent properties. But when it comes to the thing that he uses to parse those emergent properties, he wants to deny any usefulness in the concept of like qualia, for example, because he can't explain it.
Right.
There is no explanation for qualia. There probably never will be an explanation for qualia. And for that reason, he must deny it. So
Well,
what's
when you say,
happening
hold
here?
on, hold on, but when you say you can't explain it, you mean from the physicalist ontology?
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
From physical processes. Yeah. So
Right.
what's happening here from just a little bit earlier in the video to now is he's completely flipped his position on this question of whether or not emergent properties are actually real. He thinks the ones that we conceptually come up with are real, but the ones that nature gives you, like qualia, are not real. I just think
Yeah.
that's totally backwards.
Let me I happened to be reading this morning. I've been reading some David Bentley Hart, and he basically is tearing down Sean's position for the first third of the book. And one of the things that struck me is he just put it simply this way, when he's talking about the sort of circular thinking we're trying to point out here. He says this. He says, this is the position, basically. Physics explains everything, which we know because anything physics cannot explain does not exist, which we know because whatever exists must be explicable by physics, which we know because physics explains everything. And I think that is kind of what's going on here.
That's a great line.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Next they get into Mary's room, which is this famous thought experiment, originally proposed by Frank Jackson. Now, Frank Jackson is now a physicalist, because he takes the ability response, which you'll see here, but I'm going to point out that that's totally irrelevant. I don't think that Sean even engaged with this in any meaningful way. This one is about 6 minutes long, so it's a little bit longer, but after that, we just have one more clip, and then we're going to shut off this video, and me and you are going to have a discussion about maybe some other things.
Yeah.
But there are philosophers of mind who don't just want to say science hasn't explained consciousness yet, but that it in principle cannot do so. It seems to occupy a different kind of space. Thomas Nagel is the sort of famous name here that I think most succinctly puts this case in what is it like to be a bat. And one useful way of getting at this is with a famous thought experiment that I've heard you speak about before, but I had a question about your interpretation or response to this. Famously, Mary's room. I talk about this all the time on the show. And most people are familiar, Mary is in a room, it's totally black and white. She experiences no color for all of her life, but she is given every single piece of information that could possibly be written down onto a piece of paper and understood and comprehended by her. She's given that and she becomes an expert. She learns about the wavelengths of light. She learns about the biology of the eye and the brain chemistry and all of that kind of stuff. But she's never seen blue. And then at the end of her life, she steps outside, she looks up, she sees the blue sky. And the question is, does she learn something new? And the implicit answer is, yes, she learns something new. She learns what it's like to see blue. And whatever that extra thing is that she's learned is what consciousness is. I've heard you talk about this before, and I just want to give you space to respond to that. And then I've got a follow-up question if your answer remains the same as it did when I last heard you speak about this. So what do you think about that?
I'm a little bit thrown off my game because it's always red that she's never seen, and you're making it blue, and I'm not quite sure how to change gears so quickly, Alex. So let me give it a try. And I think there's different. I have one opinion, but there's different ways of stating it. So let me state it this way. Mary's room, even though Frank Jackson, who popularized the thought experiment, has repudiated the conclusion that it is used to draw, many other people still stick with it. I get that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, no, he's totally a physicalist now.
Wow, really? Do you know why? Was there
Because it's a bad argument. I can explain why I think it's a bad argument. I cannot promise I can explain why he changed his mind about it. But look, it's supposed to be a refutation or repudiation. I was mixing up those two words together, of physicalism. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to reach the conclusion that physicalism can't be true. Okay. Well, what is the physicalist saying about what's happening to Mary, the color scientist, in her room? He's saying that when she's in her room and everything is black and white and she's reading all the books on color theory and getting all of these pieces of information, she's learning things. And what that means to the physicalist is there are certain connections between certain neurons in her brain that are firing and strengthening so that when you ask her questions, she can answer them, et cetera, et cetera. A usual physicalist reductionist account of what it means to be learning those things. Then she steps outside. Blue light wavelength photons impinge on her retina for the first time, and she sees the color blue. What happens to the physicalist? Different neurons fire in her brain, and different synapses are strengthened. No one disagrees with that. And now she says, "Oh, now I know what it's like to see and experience the color blue." Where in the world is there any problem with that? Like, where is the refutation of physicalism? The physicalist explains this with 100% fidelity. There's nothing
So,
missing.
so he needs to just go from the neurons to the experience. Go
Right.
ahead and do that. That's the
Right.
problem.
Not only that, I mean, that is the problem in
Mhm.
a nutshell. But I mean, look, he's just saying it's physical because everything's physical. And so the firing of neurons is a physical happening, and therefore it's all physical, but it's completely avoiding the substance of the knowledge argument. Look, I would formulate it like this: Mary's room shows that there are certain aspects or f- features of color perception that are not reducible to physicalist language. The physicalist language is the language of mathematics. If it is true that anything is not reducible to it, then reductive physicalism is necessarily false. Okay. I mean, and he's just completely ignoring this whole aspect. He's like, I don't see a problem. I don't see a
Right,
problem.
right. I mean, again, like this assertion that, well, when she learns all the things, like that learning, or when she sees the blue, all that is the neuron patterns firing or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Like that needs to be explained.
Right.
Like that you need to go from the neurons firing to this assertion you're making that just is the qualitative experience. And this is of course, I don't know what his answer to that would be. It'd probably be like, we just don't understand it yet, or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
it is pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, but look, there is a correlation between qualitative subjective experience and neurons firing, with the qualitative subjective experience, in this case being the experience of blue. This correlation is unexpected because the properties associated with both concepts are disparate. They're not the same. This correlation is unexpected. This needs to be explained. It's not explained by
Yeah.
just saying, I don't see the problem. It's all physical.
And this points to another thing. I mean, maybe it's the same thing, but that I always think about, in that, I use my own little version of this, of like, if you were talking to a blind person about sight, and you could explain to them everything that it's like to see, and it would be a damn shame if they assumed that, like, they understood what you meant by your argument, right? Or by your words, or by your description. And they just went, oh, okay, I think I kind of know what it's like to see, versus actually seeing for even a glimpse, right? The difference in that kind of thing. And we do this, it's not just science, philosophy also, right? Describes, when someone says describe what consciousness is, right? You're right away going to be in the land of description rather than the experience, right? And it's this subtle mistake we make, where we forget that we're making a description of an experience, and we confuse the description for the experience itself. And that's what's trying to be pointed out here, is that, like, no matter the description, no matter how detailed the menu, you never get to eat the menu. And that's the category error that is attempted to be
By
pointed
the
out
way,
here.
I just want to say Alex O'Connor. I mean, I appreciate you saying all that. But Alex O'Connor is doing a really good job. I really appreciate the work he's doing here lately, especially on this topic of consciousness. I think that he's bringing so much clarity to the issue. It's so refreshing to see one of these bigger creators actually pushing up against the kind of mainstream dogma that is physicalism
There's
on
no
the points that
doubt.
don't make any sense.
For sure. There's another clip of him on another podcast, not his own, where on his own he's got to be quite accommodating, right, to everybody as an interviewer. But on his own, where I think he said something like, he thinks physicalism, which is what Sean is saying here, is like, I think he said it's like the most wrong thing, like the
In the
craziest
history.
philosophy, in
Yeah.
like the history of philosophy or something. So
Yeah.
we know where he stands on this, as much as he's not going to say that here. And you can see also in the comments of this video, his audience is just like, oh, thank God the voice of reason of Sean Carroll is back to get Alex back into reality, and it's interesting to see this he's going to have to navigate an interesting sort of he's obviously not audience captured, so he's definitely willing to say what he thinks, and that's what's refreshing.
It's refreshing. It's respectable.
The crowd.
Yeah,
for sure.
Very respectable. Okay, so this is just like the closing thing I thought you might get a kick out of.
When it comes to consciousness, just in closing here, what do you think? Are you totally just nonplussed by it? Are there any of these kind of thought experiments or problems, the stuff that, someone like Philip Goff writes about in Galileo's Error or whatever? I know you've debated him a few times.
Great book, by the way. Shout out Philip Goff. We're not panpsychists. But regardless of that, I think Philip Goff is also doing like a fantastic job pushing back against materialism. Great book in Galileo's Error.
Thomas Nagel, all these guys. Is there anything in that? It's sort of like the question I asked you about God earlier. You don't agree with it, but is there something about it that makes you go, gosh, this is a bit weird and needs explaining? Or are you just like, it's just brain chemistry, like, what's everyone going so crazy about? Like, you can understand why so many philosophers are completely perplexed by this experience thing. And what do you think is the strongest consideration that would maybe move you out of physicalism if it were like powerful enough?
I think it'd be easy to move me out of physicalism if there was just evidence that something was happening that physicalism couldn't explain.
Yeah.
Hey,
so
did he talk to Mike Brigandi lately?
Yeah, the things
they got together. Oh my God.
The things I can't explain are brute or they don't exist, and so therefore there's nothing physicalism can't explain.
Well, it doesn't have to explain everything, especially the things that I don't want to have to explain in physicalism. Oh my Lord.
Yeah. So again, coming back to the question, right? Can science explain everything? I think, if the audience isn't aware by now, our answer to that question is going to be no.
No.
And that's not to disparage science. We still think it's like super useful. I'm particularly like kind of a quantum physics nerd. I just like technology and science all together. So like this isn't in any way, shape, or form meant to like put anybody down or
forget about not disparaging science. I'm defending science. To say that it can do everything is to put science itself at risk. Why? Because you overextend your method, and then you're making claims that are actually not scientific, that won't hold up to scrutiny. And then what happens is people say, and we see this in our society right now, we say, oh, those scientists, like, they're full of it. Like that, they just have an opinion like everybody else. So actual science within its scope and its sphere of competence is then questioned, right? By overextending what it can do. So not at all attacking science. I'm defending it. It's somebody that's saying it can go way beyond what its method actually is capable of is the one that's putting science at risk.
Yeah, look, I mean, imagine you have a step ladder that goes like this. The more you spread it out, right, the less integrity it's going to have. You're kind of saying something similar. Like, look, when you extend a method or a methodology beyond what it is competent in or capable of doing, you kind of just dilute it altogether, right? Like it also allows for
diluting it. You will make claims that are dogmatic. You're basically mistaking ideology and calling it science now. And then you're going to make ideological dogmatic claims. And this happens, this all the time with us. People will come and be like, here's my metaphysical belief, and this is science.
So you believe in a methodology.
That's your worldview. It's just no, but the big problem with that is that they just have a belief, but they're trying to pass it off as science. And when that happens and they eventually get caught, because you're going to get caught when you do that, then people say, well, why should I listen to anything that these scientist guys say? Because they just make stuff up. And we see that right now happening.
We see a lot of public distrust in science. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what one thing. That's one thing. I mean, this is just a minor thing, but if anyone were to accuse us of being anti-science or something, it's quite the opposite. Science is incredibly useful, like you said. Now, and it's in its sphere of competence. It's what should be used. Furthermore, if there are scientific results that make an ontology not adequate empirically, the ontology should go, not the science. So there's nothing wrong with the scientific method. There is a problem when somebody thinks that the scientific method is the only path to knowledge of any kind and every single thing. And look, to be fair to Sean, he didn't say everything. He brought up morality and I forgot one other thing, but he certainly didn't say consciousness. And I question this. So, okay, consciousness falls, in his view, within the sphere of competence of science because he has beliefs, physicalist beliefs, about how consciousness is generated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Notice that that's a belief that's a presupposition to the science. There's no science saying this. This is just like, I believe this. So that's why consciousness is a subject for science, right? And obviously, you and I don't think consciousness shows up. Forget about that. Everyone should say consciousness does not show up on the screen of perception. He said we study things that are out there in science, which I agree with. Why is it that you can study consciousness using the scientific method?
Well, because if everything is physical, then you have to be able to study consciousness. Like, it just has to be true.
There's the imposition of the faith, essentially, to the science, right? I mean, I'm just asking a very specific question. Science needs to get its evidence through sense perception. That's how we verify things. It's how this is how the method works. Consciousness, there's Rupert Spira has a great thing where he says scientists going out to study consciousness, or a science of consciousness, is like a character in a movie searching within the world of the movie, trying to find the screen
and proclaiming that they found it.
Well, yeah, I mean, in advance of finding it, saying like, well, it's in the objects out there in the movie, so the screen is there. But like, is that a fruitful thing to try to do? Right? It's a total category error to try to do that. And so this probably gets to where maybe you and I have some disagreement. So I'm because of this problem in the West, at least where I live, right? This notion that science is the only way we talk about any subject with any kind of clarity is so ingrained in the culture that I am very apt to point out to people who are trying to move this conversation into the realm of science that this is not a move you can make, because so many people want to say, well, we don't know, is reality mental or physical? Let's go to science because science is the only way we get answers. And I always think that's a mistake. I think that when you do that, you're making a category error. And when you make this category error, you reinforce this Sean Carroll-like belief that science can arbitrate this particular category of subject.
Didn't you get dunked on Twitter by
Stuart Hameroff. Yeah. So I don't know if I got dunked on. I think like it was a self-own on his part. But basically I said there is no such thing as the science. So I'll say something hyperbolic like this, like the science of consciousness does not exist. And then Stuart Hameroff said, here's the invitation to the third inaugural Science of Consciousness conference. So it obviously exists. It's like, yeah, you think it exists, and that's the problem,
Yeah, so I'll come to your defense here a little bit, right? Obviously, Stuart Hameroff is completely missing the point. Look, when Stash says, when my friend here says, there is no science of consciousness, what he means is that there is no science of what consciousness is. Now, I would describe it like this. I would say there is a science, which he might disagree with, of what consciousness does. We can study how consciousness behaves. We can use IIT. We can use global workspace theory. But these have a very limited application in that they don't tell you what it is. They just tell you what it does.
Yeah, but the problem is that people invoke this stuff on the question of what it is.
Of what it is, because they're confused.
Yeah, and or they're looking at, like in the case of Hameroff, right? He says, look, anesthesia shuts consciousness off. Okay. This is so that's not true.
Right.
But that's the basis for everything that he says. Now, it does shut something off. It shuts your
wakefulness,
self-awareness, your wakefulness off. And there's something to be said about studying like how microtubules might be correlated with that type of change in conscious experience, right? But 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 he thinks what he's doing is solving the hard problem, basically. And or maybe not solving the hard problem, but talking about when he uses the word consciousness there, the same thing that Chalmers meant when he coined the hard problem.
Mhm.
And that's just not the case. So this is where so much confusion comes in. But the big thing is just this, for me at least, is this move from okay, we have this big open question about consciousness in our understanding of reality. We need to solve this with science, so let's keep just trying to solve it with science, and we'll eventually get there. Like, this is a misguided way of thinking, and as you know, Alex, we completely ignore what people coin or what people say or label spiritual practice, which introspection, meditation, contemplation, that's not even on the menu, like, for most people, about how to answer this question about what consciousness is. But that's the only thing that looks at mind directly, which is what science admittedly can't do, right? And that's why I'm so sort of passionate about this, because I feel like the balance has shifted, especially in this area, at least in the West, to completely one-sided. Science is the only thing that, if we're going to talk seriously about something, it's going to be in using science.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even disagree with you like sort of philosophically on anything you just said. It's just how do we take what you just said and then also have a pragmatic approach to this conversation. I'm like somewhat of I mean, we're both public figures, I suppose. But like I'm somewhat outspoken on like platforms like TikTok. I'll drop my thing down below. By the way, we'll also put the link to the Alex O'Connor video in the description below.
Sure.
But the question is like, okay, the problem is anytime you say, look, there is no science of consciousness, people think you're taking away their toys. And I just feel like that if we want this to be a global discussion and a discussion that's not confined to some small obscure place on the internet around idealism, that we have to be like a little more inclusive. But I say that, but I also don't disagree with any of your reasons for pushing back on this. So
Look,
it leaves me in a weird position.
Yeah, we had this conversation about Bernardo and Christoph Koch and IIT, right? About whether or not it's a mistake to sort of, for Bernardo to go down the road of, I want to quantify dissociation into a number, whether or not that could come back to bite you later on when someone says, oh, okay, so it is measurable. It is quantifiable in this way. I feel like it undermines, like, I get that the strategy though too. It's like, hey, if anyone's going to pay attention to me, I can't just be out there being like, science doesn't get at this, so this is the world we live in. I get this argument and I'm sympathetic to it too. You bring this up all the time with me, like, hey, all people are going to think when you say there's no science of consciousness is, oh, this guy's a anti-science nutcase, right? And then you just can't have a conversation. So we must, by the fact that the landscape is what it is, sort of indulge this. It's just that you got to be very careful that it doesn't force you in a principled way out of your actual, you can't concede fundamental things that make your ontology coherent, Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I really don't even have that strong of a pushback right now. We've been arguing about this all week, like on the phone, and then we get here and we're like, whatever, man. I don't know.
No, I think like you're right to say, if we're going to be out here talking about this, right, with our massive audience,
Massive mental process.
Yeah, please subscribe.
Please do.
Yes. Then, if we're going to be out here talking about this, like, you have to reach people where they're at, and I get that too. And so, if you're going to be canceled immediately out of the cool kids science club by saying that consciousness is not something science can study, even if that's true, there's a strategic argument to make about sort of like a bridge to get there through like concessions in this regard. But it's just a very dangerous territory too, because you can make the concession to where you make yourself a hypocrite really fast, you know?
Oh, you know what? By the way, shout out Jeffrey Yoshimi, professor of philosophy and cognitive science at UC, University of California, whichever campus it is. I think it starts with an M. Wrote a paper that I did a video on, and hopefully we're going to get him as a guest here next month, called The Metaphysical Neutrality of Cognitive Science. Very interesting paper. It explains exactly how there's not really a science of what consciousness is. It doesn't follow from the science that consciousness is physical, is non-physical, or that like physical and mental stuff exist. None of that follows from the science. You can take those interpretations. So I just say all that to say, shout out Jeffrey. But also, um, there is no science of what consciousness is. And this isn't like a controversial position. It's just not one that people like, because it seems not pragmatic to say that, you know?
Because consciousness is not one additional object in addition to the other objects that appear within it. All objects appear within consciousness. So consciousness does not appear itself within it as an appearance. And science studies the appearances. And I just point out that if I could read this, this might be my favorite quote of all time, but it's from Arthur Stanley Eddington as a counterpoint to Sean Carroll here and to what we're talking about here. He says, "We have learned by the exploration of the external world by the methods of the physical sciences leads not to a concrete reality, but to a shadow world of symbols, beneath which those methods are unadapted for penetrating. Feeling that there must be more behind, we return to our starting point in human consciousness, the one center where more might become known. There we find other stirrings, other revelations than those conditioned by the world of symbols. Physics most strongly insists that its methods do not penetrate behind the symbolism. Surely then that mental and spiritual nature of ourselves, known in our minds by an intimate contact, transcending the methods of physics, supplies just that which science admittedly is unable to give." Okay, this is a scientist saying this. Okay, it's an obvious point that once we define physics as the study of the physical, we are limited to the physical, and not everything fits into that category. And so we literally cannot take that method and penetrate beyond what it's designed to do, or we get into a circular reasoning.
Yeah, I like the choice of wording there. A shadow world of symbols. If anybody is familiar with like Plato's allegory of the cave, essentially what Eddington is saying there is when we hit the quantum revolution, when we started doing quantum physics rather than classical physics in a really loose sense, there's this realization that these guys on the front lines, if you will, were coming to, which is that like all we're ever doing is measuring the shadows on the wall in the cave.
Yeah.
So
What became, it's not that like the whole new physics came in. What just became is that like we used to think we were measuring reality directly, like what Sean Carroll is saying, but we found out that we're not.
mhm.
And that's all that happened.
And that's always been true, regardless of if you're doing classical or quantum. It's just we were forced to confront it, right?
Yeah, exactly. We were forced to actually acknowledge this fact, and that's what changed. It's not that there's some, new thing, that new kind of physics. It's just that it's always been this way, and that's and we're just now forced to acknowledge it. And so, what does that mean? It means the project of science is not to tell you what reality is. It's to tell you how it behaves on the screen of perception. And we then say, well, no, these results are spooky, and they're what's the word people use all the time, like
Paradoxical,
magical or something, or like they'll say they're
weirdness, quantum weirdness.
yeah, just it's weird, these results. It's weird because of our presuppositions, our ontological presuppositions. That's what makes everything so. That's what they mean by what they mean. Weird means does not comport with my previous
what I already think
assumption. Yeah. And then you have to then either, and this is what I said earlier, when the science shows you, right, that something's true, you don't throw out the science, you throw out the ontology, right?
Right.
And that's what is happening here is, oh, if we really are reductive physicalists, these empirical results don't really fit that model anymore. So we should change the model, not the ontological model, not try to explain away the evidence.
Yeah. If science is showing you that entanglement is an actual phenomena that is occurring, right? Then you should change your metaphysics to adapt to that rather than trying to do like mental gymnastics to account
Keep it
for it.
within your metaphysics. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, and we always say this too, science is not the way to solve this though. Like, I don't like the movement when it comes to people starting to bring up quantum mechanics. Like, it's true, it makes physicalism less empirically adequate, but physicalism has plenty of other problems, that most notably the fact that you can't eat a menu. You can't go from the description
You
to the thing
can, it just
described.
won't fill you up. But...
Yeah, I mean, you can try. I mean, like, but Sean's looking a little bit pale, you know? And so
I'm not sure if he eats, bro. He looks like a cyborg. All right, I love you, Sean. I'm sorry, dude. You know, we just have to. We have to do it.
yeah,
Anyway.
no. But anyway, so I think that that move where people want to talk about non-locality, or realism in terms of the quantum experimental results, verifying Bell's inequalities or whatever it might be, this will always turn into a argument over how to interpret those results. And it's again saying, you know what, we have this ontological metaphysical difference, let's solve it using science. And this is not what science is intended to do. Science is intended to predict the appearances, and to be able to invent technology that takes advantage of that knowledge that you gain by that method. And it does great at that. Let's leave it at that and keep it out. Other than, I mean, we can always look at the empirics and see how they inform the ontology, but the idea that this isn't worth talking about, or there's no other method to look into the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, is to give science a way bigger job than it deserves. One more thing, I know I'm ranting here, but this is something that I think it occurred to me, is that science is like if you think of like the reality like a company, science is kind of like the IT department. Like, it keeps the technical side running. It's really good at doing that, inventing technology. But if you let the IT department run the company, if they think they run the company, the whole thing, it's a disaster, right? And so I think that's a really good analogy with this, because because science is has a very high competence in a limited subset of what its method is useful for. But to extend it beyond that is to invite a disastrous ontology, which results in massive suffering for yourself and others, a completely skewed way of looking at reality that changes so much at the level, at a personal and societal level.
Well put, man. I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think it's a good spot to end it. What do you think?
Absolutely, man.
Okay.
Nice chatting.
Look, I appreciate everybody hanging out with us. Please drop us a subscribe, hit the like button, leave us a comment. Anything that would help our video reach a wider audience would be much appreciated.
YouTube's been killing us a little bit lately, so we appreciate it.
Yep. All right. Peace out, everybody. Bye. The core question is this: can science explain everything in the universe? And by virtue of that, is physicalism true?